going to do is just open up, and I've shared with Alicia some of the topics. Alicia?
Yes.
Get back on for a moment.
Yes.
All right, so she's going to act as a moderator. Do you have anything you want to say before we start?
No, we kind of covered things before you came online. Thank you.
Okay, excuse me. All right, so I thank you. So are we ready now? Tell me when we're ready.
Yes, we're ready.
Okay. Well, good day and welcome to first AME Open Communication. You know, a lot of people have their eyes set on the national races and even some on the state races, but local issues affect us so much. I'm delighted tonight to have with us the interim district attorney and two candidates who are vying for that position. Now, the district attorney does not make laws, but they can decide whether to charge someone with a crime and what charges to bring. They can choose which crimes to prosecute, and they also can recommend whether someone is up for bail or not. So there's a lot of things the district attorney can do, and they are a leader in our community. And so tonight, we just want to invite the candidates to have a discussion, to share with us their thoughts in a respectful dialogue. And I'm going to ask Alicia Leverett to lead us in our discussion as the moderator. Alicia?
Okay, good evening, everyone, again. If you would take just a few moments to introduce yourselves, and let's do this alphabetically. So that would be Mr. Chafin first. If you would introduce yourself and let us know, what do you think is what makes the district attorney's office effective? How can the district attorney's office be effective, especially in Athens, Clarke County? I know you are the Western District, which also covers Oconee County, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? But what makes the district attorney effective on the local level? So if we can start with Mr. Chafin.
Certainly. And I would just like to thank First A.M.E. Church for having us here tonight. My name is James Chafin, and I'm running for the office of District Attorney. As many people know, my wife Patricia and I are proud parents to a newborn daughter, Charlotte, and we attend Redeemer Presbyterian Church, where I serve as a deacon. And just to tell you a little bit about me and why I'm running is I've been a lawyer for 21 years, 14 of which have been right here in Clarke and Oconee County as an assistant district attorney, representing the people of this community in that office. I've presented in front of more than 100 jury trials during my time in this office and in practice overall for 21 years. And I'm running as a nonpartisan candidate because I don't believe that politics belong in our courtrooms. I've worked in courtrooms for 2 decades, and the work that we do on a day-to-day basis generally has nothing to do with politics at all. It has to do with facts, it has to do with the law, it has to do with things that happen in our community. And so that's why I've chosen to run as a nonpartisan candidate. I currently serve as the Deputy Chief Assistant District Attorney for the Western Judicial Circuit District Attorney's Office, and I'm responsible for all aspects of prosecuting serious violent felonies, criminal street gang cases, crimes that are committed against women, and crimes that are committed against children. And these are some of the most serious cases that occur in our community. And those are very serious cases, and I take my job very seriously because when I talk to people, I do talk to people who are dealing with some of the most difficult situations that have ever happened in their life. And we want to make a difference in the lives of our community. And so when you talk about being effective as a district attorney, there are a number of ways that a district attorney is effective in the community. You know, by and large, most people agree about how they view their own community and what they want for their community. People want to be safe in their community. They want to make sure that their community, their neighborhoods, their children, their families are safe. And a district attorney plays a role in that. People who are arrested for crimes, that's not the end of the case. It's the beginning of a case. If a person is arrested for a crime and charged with a crime, that case goes to court, and the district attorney is the one who's responsible for shepherding that case, trying that case if it's a jury trial, and presenting that evidence to the people, to the jury. And a district attorney has that responsibility. The district attorney also has the responsibility of being the legal advisor for the grand jury, who is oftentimes the one making these charging decisions. And so those are very important roles that a district attorney has. And one of the ways that we can be effective in making sure that we are keeping our community safe is by upholding the law. A person has broken the law and there's evidence of that. The district attorney is the person who goes forward on the evidence. They are the ones with the burden of proof. So they've got to hold people responsible by proving to a jury the evidence in the case. There are other ways that a district attorney can be effective. One of the things we want to make sure that we are doing is that we are treating people fairly. And the reason that that's important, the reason that's something that makes a district attorney effective is building the public trust in what happens in our courthouses. The courthouse is a very important civic function that we have where cases come before the people. And people want to make sure that when they go to court or their loved one goes to court, that they're treated fairly. And that's whether they've been charged with a crime themselves or they've had a loved one who's been the victim of a crime or they themselves been a victim. And so working to make sure that we are treating our citizens fairly, that we're upholding the law, is a way to effectively build trust in our community for what's going on at the courthouse. I think we can also be effective in that understanding how the district attorney can affect the lives of the people that we come into contact with. And oftentimes you will hear us talk about the serious violent cases that we deal with. And we will always have to deal with those cases, and there will always have to be a district attorney who can try those cases. But there also are other cases that deal with issues that have to do with nonviolent cases, oftentimes dealing with young people. And so I think a district attorney can be effective by understanding that many people that we come into contact with are good people who have made a mistake. They may be on hard times. They may be struggling with an addiction issue. They may be struggling with a mental health issue that has brought them into the courthouse because they've been charged with a crime that came out of their things that they're suffering from. And so there has to be some work in that because we don't want to see people repeat offend because of issues that can be dealt with. And so there are programs in place that the courts have set up that the district attorney plays a role in. We have treatment and accountability courts. We have drug courts. We have pretrial diversion programs, which is a program that's in the district attorney's office to help people get the treatment they need, to make sure that people are being held accountable, but also to make sure that people can move forward from whatever's happened in their past so that they are not always being held down by a past mistake. And so I think those are a number of ways that a district attorney can be effective for the community, is understanding that for a community to thrive, people need to feel safe. People need to understand that they're being treated fairly. People need to have an opportunity to move beyond their past. If they've shown that they've been rehabilitated and want to move in a different direction, we need to work with them to try to give them those opportunities, because that is how our community thrives. It's when our citizens thrive.
Thank you. I'm trying to, I should have said ahead of time that we want to try and keep these to about 4 or 5 minutes. So you're right at about 5 minutes. And I thank you. You will have an opportunity to speak again. Ms. Gonzales, would you like to move forward and give us your interpretation about 4 or 5 minutes?
Yes, thank you so much. And of course, I thank First AME Church for holding this. It's a place that I always enjoy when I go and visit, and sorry that we can't do that in person right now. My name is Deborah Gonzales. Many of you know me because I served as the former state representative of House District 117, which included a part of the west and north of Athens, Georgia. And you also know my background as an attorney and as a community advocate and activist here right in town. When I look at this question of what makes a DA office effective in our community, there are three things that come to mind. The first is something that we lack currently, and that is community trust. The idea that there can be a partnership between the people in the community and law enforcement agencies such as the DA office and the police. And you know, when I talk to people in the Safe in Athens, Vision Athens subcommittee, and they start talking about, well, we want to use a risk assessment so that we can know how to help the individuals in the community, but they don't necessarily always answer honestly. My question to them is, instead of focusing on the fact that they're not answering honestly, is focused on why they are not answering honestly. And most of that comes from this lack of community trust. So I think in order for us to have an effective DA office, we need to work on that part of community trust. The second thing is to have an efficient office, and that includes making sure we have the right policies, the right performance measurements in place, making sure that we are looking at the decisions that are made in that office by all the people who are in the office. It's not just the attorneys who are there, but the victim advocates, the investigators, the administrative staff, everyone who has a role in that office, and to understand what their role then is within the bigger context of the criminal legal system. So I think that's the second thing. The third thing that I would bring up is this financial stewardship. You know, this is an office that has right now about a $1.9 million budget, and that is a lot of money, a lot of taxpayer money that we are in charge of. And I always say that budgets are moral documents. Tell me where you put your money, and I'll tell you what it is that has a priority for you. And I think it's really important that there is a transparent process with that budget, because it is the people's money that is being used. And the last thing that I would say, and there's many more, I'm just, you know, shortening these to 4 because of time, but the last thing is that we need to acknowledge some of the underpinning that makes our current criminal legal system so problematic for our community, and that is systemic racism. And we need to acknowledge it, because until you acknowledge what the problem is, you really can't make a commitment to resolve it or to fix it. And although there are many little things that we can do every single day to address that, including training and such as implicit bias, the truth is you can't train some of this out when it's a systemic problem. You have to deal with the system itself. It's not necessarily at an individual level, but at the system. So those are just 4 things that I would point out right now: the building that community trust, making sure we have an efficiently run office, making sure we are financial stewards in a good way for the taxpayer money, and making sure that we are also acknowledging the issue of systemic racism in our criminal legal system. And so those are all reasons for why I am running to be the next DA in Athens, Clarke, because I don't feel that those are issues that are being addressed adequately or have been addressed adequately in the last 20 to 48 years here. So thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight, and I look forward to the rest of the questions.
Thank you. Mr. Patterson.
Thank you for having me. I'm Brian Patterson. I'm the acting district attorney for the Western Judicial Circuit, and I'm running to be the district attorney because I love our community and I'm committed to keeping it safe and also to safeguarding the rights and liberties of all our persons. Just to tell you a little bit about my background, I'm married. My wife is Amanda. She works at the University of Georgia, and we have 2 children. I have a little boy that's in the 3rd grade, and then I have a little boy who's in the 6th grade, and a little girl who's in the 3rd grade. And I've lived in Athens, Clarke, and Oconee counties for about 25 years. I went to college and law school here at the University of Georgia. And our family are members at Athens First United Methodist Church. Really back in 2002 is when I made the personal and professional choice to devote my career to helping people in the law. I joined the office of the district attorney in 2002, and I began in juvenile court, focusing on the treatment, rehabilitation, and supervision of our young people. And then ultimately I was promoted to the courtroom of the Honorable Steve C. Jones, who was then a Superior Court judge, and he's now a federal district judge. And Judge Jones really mentored me and taught me a lot about how to think about the criminal law and what is important to our community. I then became the Deputy Chief Assistant District Attorney, where I handled all the criminal cases in Oconee County. And then in 2007, I took over as the Chief Assistant District Attorney. And for 12 years, I managed the day-to-day operations of our courtrooms. And that includes literally thousands and thousands of decisions that go on every year in our court system. And then in March of this year, I became the acting district attorney when Mr. Malden retired. So I've handled every facet of the office of the district attorney. And I say that because the district attorney's job, as you pointed out in the beginning, is not a legislative job. It's not a political job. It is a serious legal job. And so in order to actually do the work, you have to understand every facet of the office, what actually goes on in a criminal court of law, what the victim advocates do, what the investigators do, how the police do their work. So in order to be an effective district attorney, you actually have to know something about it. You have to have experience doing it. Every single criminal case can ultimately go to a potential jury trial. What I think are 5 things that I ultimately think about from a very broad perspective about what is an effective district attorney. First of all, someone who is committed to the safety of the community. That is the role of the prosecutor, to be a minister of justice and to enforce the law. So as a second part of that, I would say it's important to fairly, justly, and equally enforce the law as to all persons. As a third thing, I would say the prosecutor also has rights to accused persons, and that he or she should vigorously safeguard the rights and liberties of accused persons. Fourth, I think it's significant that the prosecutor and his or her staff treat all persons, whether it's victims, defendants, witnesses, with compassion, dignity, and respect. And then finally, I would say this, as the prosecutor, the district attorney should be able to give a voice to victims. And I say that not from standing on the sidelines, but actually being able and capable and qualified to actually go to court and do the work. So when we talk about these issues, I base it on what I've actually done for 18 years. I'm not basing them on talking points that have been given to me by others. I base it on my actual 18 years of doing it. And so I look forward tonight to talking about what the real issues of the district attorney's office are and how my experience, I believe, makes me the most qualified candidate in the race. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've heard all of you touch on the point of the equal justice under the law. My words, not yours, paraphrasing your words, if I can say that. So if I can ask you to just give me a quick discussion of what do you see as, and you may know more so Mr. Patterson or Mr. Chafin being in the office now, but do you see or do you have a conscious, unbiased training for staff and yourselves for approaching those who are accused of a crime? I'm not saying that they are guilty, but I'm saying those that are accused. And one of the big things we see all the time is two persons being accused of the same crime treated differently. So do you have, and how do you handle that so that it's an unbiased handling and it's done across the board? Nothing is ever always the same, but as close to being the same as possible. As Mr. Patterson, since you are interim, is that the correct term? Since you are interim DA, let's start with you, and you can tell me how your office handles that. Mr. Chafin, feel free to come in if you have anything to add, and then we will listen to Ms. Gonzales as to what is her feeling of that.
All right, so that's a good question. And so I think it's important to begin where every criminal case starts, and that is with the presumption of innocence. Every person arrested by the police who has a case referred to the prosecutor's office is presumed innocent. And before anybody can be held accountable in a court of law, his or her guilt must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And there must be evidence sufficient to satisfy that burden if the case were to go to court, and every verdict has to be unanimous. So it's the highest burden in the law, and it's designed that way to make sure that people who run afoul of the law are held accountable, but also to protect the rights and liberties of all persons, including accused persons. So let me just touch on a few things that we do every single day to make sure that the law is equally applied to all persons. First thing we do is we independently and critically analyze the work of law enforcement officers. So we don't ever take anything on face value. We constantly, independently and critically analyze all information that is given to us. We also solicit the input of all affected persons and stakeholders, and that includes defense lawyers. Another thing that we do is we base our charging decisions on admissible, persuasive evidence, and I've touched on this already, in light of the burden of proof and the presumption of innocence. We also strictly apply our criminal statutes. We strictly apply the rules of evidence. We strictly apply the rules of criminal procedure, and we strictly apply the rules of ethics. And then finally, we recommend sentences that are fair, just, and balanced, and are consistent with similarly situated individuals, and we seek alternatives to incarceration where appropriate. So I think Mr. Chafin touched on this in his opening remarks, but we have many ways in our court system. We're one of the most progressive prosecutor offices in the state of Georgia, that we have many programs to divert cases outside the normal criminal model to give people a second chance. But that means people in our system who commit serious crimes are also held accountable in a significant way. So those are some of the things that we do on a day-to-day basis to make sure that all persons are treated fairly and equally in our courts.
Thank you. Mr. Chafin, do you have anything to add?
Mr. Patterson covered a few things, so I'm not going to try to recover some of that ground. What I would say is one of the things that I heard in your question dealt with not just how the cases are handled, but what type of training that you get.
Yes.
And so there is a lot of training that is available to prosecutors. I've mentioned previously in the last few weeks, we had an inherent bias course that was provided that I was able to take. That's not the first one I've taken. They are given by CJCC is one of the organizations that does it, but there are the Prosecuting Attorneys Council of Georgia also provides training to prosecutors and to staff about all sorts of topics, and inherent bias comes into that, how people are treated, so people understand how we are viewed when we do our job, because there is this question that people want to make sure that we are receiving equal justice, not just in our community, but in every community. And so I do think that that is a point of emphasis that has been made in the state of Georgia. We certainly understand the importance of it here in the Western Judicial Circuit. We want to continue to encourage and have our employees participate and take these courses, and oftentimes they're actually offered as our mandatory training that we have for our continuing legal education. So I think the training aspect of it is something that is present, something we want to continue to see, because I do think that it is an emphasis now that we're seeing in the legal system, especially for prosecutors, to consider how inherent biases could play a part in the criminal justice system, because nobody wants that to happen, and yet we understand from inherent bias that that is something that exists. So I think that being cognizant of it is very important. I also would say is that when you talk about the Equal Justice Center of the Law, there is what I would say a group or community of people that work with criminal cases. It's not just prosecutors. It is prosecutors, it is defense attorneys, and it is judges. And so it's all of those people. There are other service providers as well that are involved in working in a criminal case, that have lots of experience, that have seen many cases. And there is this working together, even in an adversarial role where prosecutors and defense attorneys don't always see eye to eye, of addressing these issues, of talking about these issues, of making sure that these issues are aware of, that if those issues are present. So we do want to make sure that we are treating people equally, that people are being sentenced fairly, that it is based on the evidence that is presented in each case, but also that it is consistent with what we would see in other cases. So I think not only are prosecutors aware of that, but defense attorneys are very aware of that. The judges are also very aware of that. And at the end of it, as you wrote, and maybe people don't often think about this, but the judge who presides over these matters is the person that's selected by the community to oversee cases. And so they are the ones who actually pronounce sentences. Oftentimes these sentences are based on recommendations or even agreements, but the judge is the one who oversees these sentences, and the judges have a large voice in what they believe is correct. And one of the things that I think all of our judges in our circuit are very cognizant of is to make sure that we are treating people fairly, that we are being consistent. And so I do think that we live in a community that is aware of these things, that and puts these into action when we do our work.
Thank you. Ms. Gonzales, your input, please.
Yes, thank you so much. So obviously I'm not in the office, so I can't say exactly what they do in there, but I can say some things that I do want to bring in order to ensure that under me, this DA office would be much more fair and just. And so the first thing that I would do is do an operational audit to see where we are. You know, sometimes when we're in a place for so long, we don't realize what the overall effects have been throughout the year. So I think it's good to have an audit just to see where we are, to see what the numbers are between the decisions that we make and people that we come in contact with, whether they're defendants or victims, and then what happens to them throughout the process and at the end of the process. So that's one thing that I would do. The second thing is to create a data transparency team that would collect that data and would make it then accessible to the public. This is something that has been promised in many of the past few years' budgets, is to have this public portal where individuals can go and see what exactly is happening in terms of the numbers. So that has not been fulfilled as of yet, and so I would like to make sure that we do that. The third thing has to deal with the sentencing itself, and so one of the things that I've proposed is to have a sentencing overview unit. You know, attitudes towards certain laws and even certain laws themselves change, including how much the sentencing should be for certain crimes. And so it would be good to be able to have a proactive approach, not just wait for people after so many years to come back to the office and say, you know, I would like you to just review the sentence, see if you can actually do a sentencing modification, but that we be proactive on this when the laws changes or when this attitude in the community changes as to who gets certain longer sentences than others. We know from the data that we have right now in our jail system in the Athens, Oconee, Western Judicial Circuit, that there is a disproportionate amount of Black and brown individuals in those jails versus white individuals and the way that they are sentenced. And so that is one thing that I will look at. And one last thing that I'll just mention again with sentencing, you know, there is this program out in Virginia where judges and prosecutors go in and take sentencing training that look at the different considerations of individuals, things that are offered now that we didn't have before, and that go beyond just diversion programs or accountability programs, but really creative ways of, one, holding people accountable, because definitely that's what we want to do. If they do something, we need to hold them accountable. But two, how to do it in a way that is truly going to benefit the community, whether that means restorative justice, whether that is, you know, a different way where the victims are part of the process as well. I think we have so many more options now that we didn't have before, and we don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel because we have these kind of programs that are being implemented all throughout in other jurisdictions that we can learn from and bring here and adapt them to what we need in our own community.
Wonderful. Thank you.